Welcome to another episode of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gers, and today we're diving into a story that hits at the heart of why this podcast exists: the courage it takes to pause, redirect, and choose a life that is truly your own. My guest today, Jake Kennington, spent more than a decade as a licensed structural engineer designing complex nine-figure projects, the kind of work that most of us would look at and say, he's made it. He climbed the professional ladder, earned the respect and recognition of his industry, and checked all the traditional boxes of success. But behind the impressive resume was a growing disconnect. As a husband and father of four, Jake reached a pivotal moment, a point where the fast-paced pursuit of achievement collided with the realization that something essential was missing. That moment set him on one of the most consequential transitions of his life. Through rebuilding his health, restoring relationships that mattered most, and redefining what achievement really meant, Jake didn't just make a change. He created a blueprint for transformation. And out of that journey came Actively Human, the coaching practice he founded to help mid-career professionals and high achievers who may look successful on paper, but feel a deeper calling toward purpose, clarity, and a more meaningful life. Today, Jake helps individuals realign their identity, career direction, and personal values so they can navigate major transitions with confidence and momentum. His mission is simple and powerful: to help people build lives they're energized to live, not just at work, but at home and within themselves. Jake's story is honest, relatable, and full of insights for anyone standing at a crossroads. I am excited for you to hear it. Jake, welcome to People in Transition.
Thanks, Bob. Happy to be here and great to meet you and be on the show. Thank you.
Jake, let's dive right in. You achieved what many would call traditional success. When did you first sense that something wasn't aligning internally, and how did you recognize that feeling was worth paying attention to?
Yeah, what a great question. I think it's a great question because a lot of people, perhaps your listeners, experience this. So I'll share a little bit about my background and what I did professionally for a long time and what led to that transition or that change. Many, many moons ago, while I was dating my girlfriend at the time, now wife, I found in college a career called civil engineering, and I pursued structural engineering as a subset of that. As the years progressed, I graduated. We ended up having children. We have four wonderful children now, ages 2 through 11. Got the college degree, got my work experience. And as an engineer, you take several tests to become a licensed engineer. So I did that. And ironically, along that path, about 10 years into that profession, getting those licenses, getting that experience, I started to think, now what? Or is this it? I wasn't unhappy by any stretch of the imagination, but I just was looking for more. A lot of people say I'm looking for more, or I'm looking for something different. Myself included, I didn't know what that more was or what different would be. And so I actually ended up moving my family from California to Utah, 800 miles away, to take another job as a structural engineer. And 2 years later, which brings us to current time frame, I ended up actually going back to the firm in California, but this time fully remote because I could scale back my engineering hours to work less days each week as an engineer and to start my business, Actively Human, to help other people kind of navigate this transition as well. And so for me, the easiest way to identify that moment or that time frame in my life where what I was doing wasn't working, I felt like something was missing, as you mentioned, is when I had those internal questions of now what, or is this it? And I think, again, a lot of your listeners can identify with those questions. They might be having the same thoughts in their career and their life.
Jake is a structural engineer who's used to solving very complex problems. How did that analytical mindset help or maybe hinder you in your own personal transition? And what's the takeaway for job seekers from that analytical style?
Some of my favorite people to work with are other engineers, other technical professionals, and it's for that same reason. We kind of speak the same language. We're analytical, we're logical. It's pretty cut and dry. Where that gives us a hang up is because we're that way, we often overthink things. We don't want to make wrong decisions. We want to make the right decision. You can't see me, but I'm saying right in air quotes because we want to mitigate the risk, so to speak, which can be a good thing, but it's a double-edged sword sometimes because we have that paralysis, by analysis where we just don't take action because we're still planning and plotting and preparing. And I'm all about planning and preparation. I think those are key. We do a lot of that in what I do with my clients and my coaching clients. But at some point, you have to start to take action. And so that's where it can become a hindrance if you plan for too long or prepare too long and don't take the action. So as far as finding a new job, or you mentioned career seekers or job seekers, make a plan. That's great. But get to the action part as quick as possible. Go take action, apply for a job, talk to other people, get your feet wet, right? And you'll find clarity a lot faster that way.
Jake, rebuilding your health and restoring those relationships were major parts of this journey that you just described. What did those early steps look like to you? How did they influence the direction you eventually took? And what worked in that pivot process to help you end up where you're at today?
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this. A lot of people might again have these questions. Now what is this it? Or maybe they see a little bit of themselves in my story and they think, well, what do I do next? And my answer to them would be work on yourself. What I did was it was a slow process, but like you said, I worked on my physical health and I worked on strengthening my relationships with my wife and my kids and my extended family and old friends from college. The reason being, from the outside, if you were to talk to somebody, their boss or their spouse, to an individual that's maybe struggling, the boss or the spouse or the close friend might describe that individual that's struggling as disengaged, where they're not really fully engaged in what they're doing, including their work and their career, but also the life outside of work. So that's things like your physical health and your relationships. And so for me, that's where it all started. I hit the gym, I started running, I started talking to my wife more, going on walks with her, and really making sure that I was around for my wife and my kids because that was what was most important for me. And that's something that was missing for almost a decade. I mean, I wasn't an absentee father. I wasn't gone, but when I was around, I wasn't as engaged and present as I should be. And the same thing with my wife and in that relationship. And so I think a lot of people will find similar attribute or similar things going on in their own lives where their physical health is slipping and their relationships aren't as strong as they could be. And so that's where I would start is focus on those things, work on yourself, and everything else will follow.
Identity plays a really large role, not only in your work life, your home life, your social life, your spiritual life, and it plays a role in transitions. What part of your identity were the hardest to let go of? And a follow-up question to that is, which new pieces were the most empowering for you to embrace when you had them in place?
Yeah, I love talking with my clients and you today, Bob, about identity. There's a really good book by James Clear called Atomic Habits. It's really well read. Most of your listeners have either read it or heard of it. But in that book, he talks about obviously habits, but more so, I think the underlying principle that he mentions several times in the book is identity. And he says this, he says, true behavior change is identity change. And so oftentimes we're unhappy or we know that something needs to change in our lives and we try to figure out the what. We try to figure out the habit or the thing that we need to change when in reality, we first need to change how we see ourselves and how we perceive ourselves, that identity piece. So for me, I'll share a little bit about my background. My father worked for himself for 40 years. He was a jeweler, and we grew up in the jewelry store, me and five siblings, so six total. 8 people in our family. We grew up in that jewelry store. It was called Kennington Jewelers in Fresno, California. And we loved seeing our dad, the jeweler. We loved hanging out with him. We loved seeing all the creative things that he did and the business that he had. But unfortunately, as a kid, my perception of entrepreneurship was that it was stressful, that money was typically tight, that my dad was quote unquote married to his job, right? That he was always there. And so as a young kid, I saw that and I thought, I'm never going to go that path of entrepreneurship. And to top that off, my dad would tell us kids, he would say, and I think this is typical of anybody that grew up in the 90s, our parents told us to go to college, to get a job, to get the benefits, work the 9 to 5. And so my dad would tell us those things. But at the end of that same breath, he would say, but I would never work for anybody. And so for him, a big piece of his identity was he was an entrepreneur. He loved the ability to create and own and control his destiny through that identity of being an entrepreneur and being a jeweler. For me, having that front row seat to entrepreneurship, I thought, man, I do not want that. And 35 years later, as I'm in my mid 30s, I have conversations with my dad about this and kind of have a change of heart where I go, you know what? I've always had side hustles. I've always had side businesses, but they've always been something extra to my career. I said, I really want to try this entrepreneurship thing. I really want to become a coach and help other people. And I feel really pulled in that direction. And I talked to my dad about that, and he said, yeah, go for it. And it was this light bulb moment of like, I thought my dad my whole life was telling us, don't do this because it's not what you think it is. When in reality, I've learned that he was just telling us, only do this if you really want it. And so for me, you ask what was something that I had to let go of as far as identity. It's almost as if I had this identity of I am not something. I think that that comes up a lot of time for people where they think, well, I'm right-brained, I'm not left-brained, right? Or I'm a 9 to 5 person, I'm an employee, I'm never going to own a business, I'm not an entrepreneur. And I had to let go of the I'm not to be able to accept the I am. I am an entrepreneur. I am a coach. I do own a business. I am able to help people. And so for me, that was a really big turning point. And it took me 35, 36 years to realize that I was getting in my own way. So that was a pivotal moment for me as far as identity goes.
In your Own Your Life playbook that you drafted, you talk about whatever's next for you, you need to understand these two guiding principles. Number one, what got you here won't get you there. And number two, you aren't starting over. What did you mean by those two?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because I think we're all guilty of this. I think we default to kind of either or thinking, black and white thinking. It's either this or it's that. And so a lot of us, we really hold on to the life that we've built. My story is a perfect example of being an engineer and kind of the sunk cost fallacy of like, well, I've put all my eggs in this basket and I've gone to college for this. I spent a lot of time and money and effort getting licensed and building this career. And so we tend to think like I'm kind of stuck, and that's not a great feeling, but it's like I have to do this, or the other option is to burn it all down and start over. And so the key principles there are you don't have to burn it all down and start over. But at the same time, what got you here won't get you there. There's a wonderful book, I believe it's by a man named Marshall Goldsmith, called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's identifying the core pieces, again, going back to identity, identifying our core pieces of our identity, how we perceive ourselves that are kind of holding us back, and being able to adopt new identities in that regard. Now, I didn't take everything that I've learned as an engineer and just throw it out the window. What's the saying? Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's that idea of we can do something new and we can become better and do something new as far as our career goes, our identity, how we show up in life, but we don't have to burn everything down that we've built. We just have to make the right adjustments along the way.
That lends itself to a follow-up question. Transition oftentimes involves grief, the loss of what is familiar. How did you navigate that emotional side of the change, and how do you help clients do that?
This is fantastic. It is difficult. It's not a light switch. I mean, the logical part of me, the engineer in me, it's like you could write it out on paper and be like, okay, I need to abandon this old identity and take this one on. But there's a lot of emotion involved with that, like you mentioned, Bob. And so it can be difficult. It takes a lot of self-talk. For me, it's journaling, it's writing, it's slowing down to write and think through my thoughts and make those thoughts clear. I'm fortunate enough to be married to my wife now 15 years. She's a great sounding board for me that I'm able to kind of talk through these things with her, and she can kind of echo those thoughts back to me to make sure that I'm making sense and that, I'm not ready to jump off a ledge or whatnot. So I think the people in our lives, the relationships that we have, whether that's a spouse or a close friend or a neighbor or our parents, are super important as far as this navigating this emotional side and grief side of leaving something and moving in a different direction. And so I would say that, but I would also say going back to the journaling and the self-reflection, I can't speak enough about that. That's been something that's helped me tremendously as I've navigated this transition, is just slowing down to write and to reflect and to gain clarity in my own thoughts.
Jake, when someone feels stuck, kind of between who they
Mhm.
are and who they want to become, in your coaching, what's the first question that you encourage them to ask themselves to navigate between those two?
Yeah, the first question, and it's kind of ambiguous or neither here nor there, and that's intentional. The first question is, what does success mean for you? And we spend a few good weeks diving into that in different ways and different methods, but people need to get really clear on what success means for them. Because once they're clear on that, they know their aim and their direction and what they're hoping for, and then it's a lot more achievable. And with that piece of what does success mean for you is obviously this identity piece as well. I just think it's an interesting question because if you lined up 10 different people and said, what does success mean for you? You're probably going to get 10 wildly different answers. And on top of that, if you ask those same 10 people a year or 2 years or 5 years from now, the same question, what does success mean for you? You might again get wildly different answers. There's a quote that I have on my phone here on my home screen. It's by a man from many, many years ago, thousands of years ago. His name was Heraclitus. And he said, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and it's not the same man. And what he means by that is the river is life and we're the man, right? So the river's changing, the water's flowing, and the river's always changing. We have different phases of life or stages of life, as we say. And then the person, the man, the individual is also always changing, right? I mentioned in my story that I started my engineering career path when I was in my early 20s as I was dating my wife. And I've been through so many life experiences, including marriage and kids and living in different states and in different countries. I've been through so many different things that life has changed and I have changed along the way. I think one of those things that we keep having to come back to, even as life progresses, is what does success mean for me right now in this phase of life?
Which I think then lends itself to some follow-up thoughts on this, Jake. Many professionals feel like they are successful, at least on paper, but
Hmm.
are privately struggling oftentimes. And I think that this is a lot more common than what we actually understand or recognize. Why do you think that's the case? And what are some of the telltale symptoms or signs that someone should acknowledge that they know that they're at that spot, that they need to spend some time on themselves and where they're going?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a bigger problem than we realize because a lot of it's internal. There are some things that we can see from the outside looking in. If we're observing a friend or a spouse or somebody else and we're trying to see if they're really struggling, there's things like I mentioned earlier, physical health is a big one. When there's a decline in physical health, that means somebody isn't as engaged in that aspect of their life or disengaged rather. Strained relationships is another one. Again, from the outside, it's hard to tell if somebody has a strained relationship, but internally, it's a little more obvious. And what I'd like to do is just share one quick example of a client that I've worked with. I'll just call him John for privacy reasons, but John is an individual that both of these things were true. He had a decline in his physical health. He wouldn't self-describe as healthy when we started working together. And then he wasn't in the best place with his relationships with his wife and his 5 kids. And so John, earlier this year, we started working together. He owns a business here in Utah, not too far from where I'm located. He's got about 20 employees. And from the outside, if you were to just observe his business and the metrics there with growth and revenue and profit and those kinds of things that are more easily measurable, you would think that John was killing it. He was what we call externally successful, right? The business was doing well, his employees were happy, things were moving in the right direction. But internally, John was really, really struggling. He was working 70 hours a week for the last 4 years. Every day of the week, he was working and he was somewhat miserable. In fact, when we first met, the first thing he told me was, I have about a year left of this lifestyle, the way I'm living right now with my business, before I burn out and I can't do this anymore. The reason he started his business 4 years prior is because he thought, well, I can run this business and I can control my schedule and my time and I can, have these employees and create this environment that's going to be beneficial to my employees and my clients. And this whole business thing is going to be fantastic. The problem with John and what we worked heavily on with him is that he never left the identity behind of individual contributor. He had spent the first 15 years of his career as being the workhorse, the guy that got things done, the guy that did the work and was in the trenches. And then he starts his business and he never sheds that identity, but yet he's trying to wear this other hat as well as president and CEO of the company and leader. And so now he's got 2 full-time jobs. He's running the company, but he's also doing the work. And what he had to do was let go of that identity of individual contributor so that he could get out of his own way and help lead his team. He told me his words were, I need to learn to trust my employees and delegate more. And he wasn't wrong, but he already knew what he needed to do, but he wasn't doing it. And the reason is because this identity piece, again, we keep coming back to it because I think it's so important. He knew what he needed to do. Oftentimes that's true of ourselves as well. We know what we need to do, but we struggle with doing it. And that's because we keep chasing new outcomes with old identities. He was trying to be the boss, but also the individual contributor by micromanaging his team and being involved in every little decision, still doing the work. And that led him to these feelings of burnout and being stuck. And like I mentioned, he had no time for his physical health. He didn't have time for his wife and kids. He wasn't present. And he's created this life that he didn't want anymore. And so that's why we started working together. And so I think there are some external signs of when somebody maybe is struggling and needs to have this period of transition into this new identity. But oftentimes it's a lot more internal, and we just have to be honest with ourselves about what we want. Again, going back to that piece about like, what is success? So for John, for him, success would be in this phase of life, it was being able to lead his company in a way that empowered his employees to do the work so that he could do what he needed to do and they could do what they needed to do and they could work together as a team to be really powerful and really successful.
Jake, several of your examples of coaching that you've done, the person has gravitated towards their own business, but that
Mhm.
isn't always the answer for someone. You can find that same peace, that same satisfaction being a part of a larger company. Am I hearing you correctly?
100%. You're right. I have shared some examples myself, and this individual, John, one of the themes here is entrepreneurship and working for yourself and that kind of thing. I don't want your listeners to get the wrong idea. You can definitely work for someone else and be fully engaged in what you do and have a wonderful life. And I'll share another client, another person that I've worked with. His name is Luis. I'll use his real name because he's a dear friend of mine and he wouldn't mind me sharing his story. Wonderful individual. I've known him for probably a decade now. We actually worked together at a previous job. And his story was a little bit simpler. It just wasn't a good fit for him at the job that he was. And so when he got clear on what success meant for him, there was a disconnect on the culture of the business that he was working for and what he wanted from life. His answer to what is success is go seek out another job, still being an employee, but be able to control your time outside of the 9 to 5 and spend it on the things that you find important. He was a big athlete in high school. He loved soccer. He loved MMA, and he got into his career. And unfortunately, again, this idea of like your physical health declining, he gained a ton of weight. And so he was just shy of 300 pounds at 10 years into his career, and he's 6'1", not a good place to be. And he knew that. And so he took his destiny into his own hands. He lost a bunch of weight. He was down in the 180 range about a year later, which is phenomenal, and did a lot of work, which was good for him, put him in a good spot mentally and physically to be able to go pursue another job. And now he has all these other hobbies outside of his career where he plays guitar, he's in the gym, he's doing these other things that bring him joy and purpose. And so for him, that was his definition of success, was go get a career that can pay the bills, where he can plug in and be engaged in a 9 to 5 employee type environment, and then go do whatever else that he wants to do after the clock's shut off and the job's done.
Jake, in your playbook, you talk about the need to own the morning. What does that mean?
Own the morning very simply means have a morning routine that serves what's most important to you in your life. And when I say that, it could be something complicated. It could be a 3-hour routine where you're meditating and running and reading and doing all these things and whatnot. But it also can be very, very simple. For me, my morning routine is I go on a walk. I think through my day, my previous day. It's my time to reflect, spend time in nature, be outside, whether it's cold or hot or whatever it is. I go on a walk in the morning. I love to read if I can. And then I spend time with my kids. And so, again, for me, it's not a complicated routine. It's not very lengthy. It's probably an hour or less. But that's what's most important to me. And it sets the stage for the rest of the day. I say, own the morning, don't let it own you. And so I think there's something profound about that idea of like putting what's most important first and then allowing everything else to follow suit. The emails will be there, the clients will be there, the fires to put out will be there after our morning. And so it's really, really important to put those things that are important first. And the guy I mentioned, John, that owns the business here in Utah and has 20 employees, one of the key things that he did to kind of own his life using this phraseology from the playbook that I have was his morning routine. He was waking up at 3:30, 4 a.m. just to get started on the day with work stuff, with his career, with his business, with everything that he felt that he had to do. And working with him, he was able to pull that back a little bit, wake up a little bit later in the day and spend time on his physical health, spend time with his wife and kids, spend time journaling, writing, reading, doing the things that were important to him so that by the time he got to work, he had set the stage for the rest of the day and he was going to be successful based on his definition that he had come up with.
Jake, we have covered so many great ideas and concepts. If you could offer just one piece of advice to professionals who are feeling something more calling them, but fear disrupting what they've already built, what is that one thing you'd tell them?
You're right. There's so many things that we covered, and I have so many ideas always going through my head. What I would say is this: if somebody feels pulled to this kind of inner disruption of like, I need to change something in my life, and they have these questions that we talked about earlier on about now what? I've built this career, I've built this life, but now what? Or is this it? I think one key thing that's really served me well is to find moments in your day where you can slow down. Life is just so hectic. It's going a million miles an hour. And like I said, there's fires to put out, there's emails to answer, there's clients to serve. We're all pretty busy. But if we can't learn to slow down, we'll never be able to fit in the pieces that are needed into our lives. Whatever that method is for you, like I mentioned earlier, I like to walk, I like to journal, I like to reflect and write. Find a method that works for you, but slow down and use that time to really let the mental dust settle so that you can be clear on what your definition of success is going forward. And to help your audience do that, we mentioned this earlier, but I have a playbook. It's called the Own Your Life Playbook. And it talks about three specific things that they can do to kind of follow this path of slowing down, redefining success, realigning with what's most important, and reconnecting with the people that they love the most. They can get that free resource at my website, activelyhuman.com. And the free resource is activelyhuman.com/hashtag playbook. It's something that they can download, read over the next couple of days, and implement right here to build the life that they want to live.
Jake, thank you so much for sharing such an honest and powerful story of transformation. Your journey really reminds us that success isn't just about what we build in the world, it's about who we become along the way. For everyone listening, if today's conversation sparks something in you, take that as an invitation to pause, to reflect, and consider what a more aligned and meaningful life could look like. Until next time, I'm Bob Gerst, and this has been People in Transition. Stay curious, stay courageous, and keep moving forward. Thank you, Jake.
Thanks, Bob. It was a pleasure today. Thanks for having me on the show.